Britton Marcus Hedden.
The phonetic alphabet. Ships that effortlessly traverse the seas. Abundant and even exotic spices and goods from around the globe. All these are amenities taken for granted in the modern world. Yet without the advancements of one of antiquity's most astounding civilizations, each of these conveniences may have looked very different today. The prevailing civilization that brought many of these conveniences was that of the ancient Phoenicians. The Phoenicians settled and grew side by side with the Israelites, following the Hebrew people's claims of a promised land. Phoenician land, in fact, was bordered by Israel to the south and by the Mediterranean Sea to the west. The region of the Phoenicians included the famed biblical cities of Tyre and Sidon. Israel's king Ahab even married into Phoenician royalty when he took Jezebel, a Phoenician princess, as his wife. Israel's proximity to the Phoenicians proved to be both a blessing and a curse to the Hebrew people. A blessing due to the sea trade routes Phoenicia opened with the world, and a curse due to the religions with which the Phoenicians infested Israel. No matter the differences between Israel and Phoenicia, the way in which the Phoenicians changed the world proved to be matched only by the nation of Israel. Unlike many of antiquity's pagan cultures that developed side by side with Israel, the Phoenician civilization was able to create a lasting impact on their own time, as well as all of history, as seen through the development of the Phoenician alphabet, Phoenician exploration, and Phoenician trade. Just as peas and carrots come together beautifully on a dinner plate, so did the Phoenicians prove to be acceptable partners in living around the land of Canaan with the Israelites. The consequences of the Phoenicians and Israelites being neighbors benefited not only those two cultures, but also the cultures in the land around them, as well as those cultures to come later in time. How different would today's world be had not the Phoenicians acted as entrepreneurs in the fields of reading, writing, trading, colonizing, and exploring? Unfortunately, the Phoenicians eventually became intoxicated with the same pride that caused the collapse of other ancient pagan nations. The Phoenicians, like many fallen civilizations, were blinded by their own prideful hands in their annexation of land to form colonies, and therefore went as far as to push the Greeks into war. Unfortunately for the Phoenicians, the Greeks were to battle what the Phoenicians were to trade. Herodotus wrote of the Persian account of the wars between the two civilizations, the Punic Wars. The great downfall of the mighty Phoenician civilization demonstrates to us that pride is a truly fatal flaw. No matter the circumstances, humility and serving can accomplish much more good than arrogance and self-pity. Do all things without complaining or disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless children of God, without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world.
Britt, your paper describes the many ways that the Phoenician culture impacted the world. Do you believe that the Phoenicians themselves were in any way impacted by their proximity to the Hebrew nation?
Thank you for that question, Ms. Mahan. I definitely believe that the Phoenicians were impacted by the Israelite civilization, as well as they influenced the Israelites themselves. In the Old Testament, we see Elijah stay at a house of a widow, and while he's at that house, the widow never runs out of the small amount of flour and oil that she has. While there, also her son, most likely just a young boy, dies of an illness, and Elijah prays over the boy, and the Lord brings him back to life. Also, as I mentioned just in my speech, Israel's king Ahab married into Phoenician royalty with Jezebel. There are several other times, for example, the building of the Hebrew temple, that King Solomon hired Phoenicians for their purple dyes, cedars, and skills in bronze work to build the temple, which without Phoenicians, it may not have been all the grandeur that it was. This shows us that a godly civilization can live next to an ungodly civilization. But the difficulties of today is that sin does not change. The Phoenicians had their own gods, and the Israelites bore witness to the Phoenicians in their interactions, and the Lord was able to save those who had faith.
Britt, will you define hubris for us, and then will you explain or tell to the nations today how that very thing could destroy their nations?
Thank you for that question, Ms. Toggestool. Hubris is an overwhelming pride. The Phoenicians were definitely plagued with hubris in that they believed they could do everything on their own. The Phoenicians were not a very strong military civilization, but they still attempted to expand their own land by exploring and colonizing new land. However, as I mentioned, this in turn pushed the Greeks into war when they attempted to colonize land that the Greeks also wanted for themselves. In today's world, this is applicable because so many people, even godly people, are plagued with pride. We may overcome a certain amount of evil, but we'll think to ourselves, wow, I did really great with that. And that's just pride sneaking up on us. And in today's world, we should preach to those countries who are trying to make it on their own without the Lord, and understand that pride in themselves is not everlasting. However, God is everlasting.
Britt, the Phoenicians gave us the linear alphabet. So where is their literature? And what cautionary tale might there be in the fact that this extraordinary culture with this extraordinary technology gave us no stories?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Graham. The phonetic alphabet was invented by the Phoenicians in that they took shapes and turned them into representing sounds. Before this, there was simply hieroglyphs and cuneiform. The Phoenicians realized that each of these forms of writing were either too time-consuming or too clumsy. With the phonetic alphabet, they could simply take some ink and some parchment or even goat skins, which I believe they did that before. They used papyrus to write on, and they could write out what would originally, with hieroglyphs, possibly take up entire walls on simply one sheet of paper. This worked for the Phoenicians in their record keeping because they were such a trading civilization. They would often keep their records just on papyrus. However, they traded on the sea, and papyrus does not hold up well in a humid, salty climate. Also, many Phoenician documents were held at the Library of Alexandria. There is some conflict over how the library was burnt down, but it was most likely burnt down from the invasions of the Turks into Europe. This is why we're lacking such an amount, although it is ironic because they are credited with being the carriers of civilization for their invention of the alphabet. I'm sorry, but could you repeat the question one more time for me?
Is there a lesson in all of this for us?
Thank you. The lesson that we can learn is that although we do not have many primary resources, we can use what we do have to get the best understanding that we possibly can. History is often written by the victors, in that maybe there's a war, but if this entire side is killed, they're not going to be writing too many papers of how they saw the battle. All we hear is the heroes of the civilizations that lasted, not the heroes of the civilizations that did not last. In today's world, we can use literature as a stepping stone into music, and then art, and then theology, and finally popular culture. And by using our literature, we can change the world.